Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today I want to start off with tier 3 characters and a tier 3 character discussion by trying to rank all of the existing villain tier 3, and it's a small list of characters compared to all tier 3s. I believe we have now 27 or 28 tier 3s, but we are still only 7. We only have 7 tier 3s that are villains, and that includes multiple tier 3s who are heroes wearing villain uniforms, i.e. Namor, Cyclops, Captain America, and the Hulk. So in terms of true pure villains, we actually only have 3 out of the 7, which is wild. So I wanted to rank them all and talk about it. I'm going to do a series later on. I'm going to do follow-up videos for ranking all of the hero tier 3s, and then I want to rank all of the tier 3s and maybe do some considerations like bring back Mr. Free-to-Play and Average Joe and then Dr. Whale. But I think it's interesting because we've recently had some really good 800 cost tier 3s come out, and especially with the evolving value of tier 3s regarding dual builds for characters like Black Widow and Hulk. It's really changed the landscape of like who your first, second, or third tier 3 should be, especially compared to even just like 6 months ago. It's changed wildly. But I want to start off with a smaller topic here for villains, just to get our feet wet in the conversation of tier 3 characters. Interestingly enough, there's a much higher parity of characters hero to villain when we look at awakened characters. We did have the 4 Warriors of the Sky all being awakened at the same time, but besides them, since then, you know, Red Skull, Dr. Octopus, Mystique have all been villains, and then only recently did we get Beta Ray Bill, Red Guardian, and a couple of others that have been heroes. So and Amadeus Cho Braun. So yeah, it's been 6 and 6, or it's been 3 and 3, completely balanced since the first 4 of the Warriors of the Sky. So let's get into it. We're going to split up the tier 3s for the villain category into PVE and PvP, into heroes. We're going to split it up into PvE and PvP just because there's not enough of a distinction in one list. If I were just going to make one list with these 7 characters, it really doesn't illustrate their values well enough, and it will sort of overvalue and undervalue certain characters. However, spoiler alert, unfortunately, Cyclops is at the bottom of the list for both. Now, that doesn't mean Cyclops is a bad tier 3. It just means that the other tier 3s are a lot better. And Cyclops, unfortunately, I mean, he's a solid tier 3. He's probably what a lot of players, especially cynical players, would expect Netmarble to do regarding 800 cost tier 3 characters. He does things well, right? He's an easy to play character. He's pretty easy to proc on. He's got healing. He's got immunity. But he just doesn't blow you out of the water with anything. But more recently, like I said, Black Widow and now Hulk, they have really pushed the bar for what an 800 CCF tier 3 can do. Now, most of the time, for the most part, with these lists for PvE and PvP, and I'll throw up the PvE list here, I am going to be just considering their value in terms of how strong they are and how good they are in the meta for different game modes that fall into the PvE category: ABX, World Boss, Squad Battle, GBR, Shadowland. But I do also want to talk about their cost. Okay, so Namor comes number 1, then we've got Apocalypse, then we have Immortal Hulk number 3, which I think is really important, then Captain America Hydra Supreme, then Magneto, then Thanos, then Cyclops. Magneto lost quite a bit of value after the Stryker changes, but he's still pretty solid, and he's very, very good for GBR. He does it very, very quickly, but the other characters just have more value in World Boss than he does, so that's why they're a little bit higher. He does have higher value in ABX, but I don't want to overvalue ABX too much. However, the top 2 characters, Namor and Apocalypse, although they overlap on the same day, they are both top slot for a combat villain. But yeah, PvE value, it pretty much speaks for itself. Hulk does a very good job, and you know, it's sort of by design that even though you build him for PvP with lots of HP and possibly a CTP of regen or like a max HP obelisk with a proc, he still ends up being very, very good for both game modes, for both PvE and PvP. So I feel like I'm not trying to push players to tier 3 Immortal Hulk, but with this uniform, it really does create a sort of Black Widow situation where you don't have to give him 2 builds, or you don't have to worry about locking him in. Now, if we put I want to sort of jump ahead, but if we put the PvE and the PvP rankings side by side, you will see that some of the characters at the top of one are at the bottom of another. For example, Namor and Thanos basically switch spots. Thanos is very weak for PvE. He has low all defense down, and he just doesn't have very high damage. And the damage that Thanos does have is split Although he is a physical attacking character, he deals half physical damage and half energy damage. So that just makes him a lot harder to play because he's not going to be very strong against Proxima, and he's not going to be very strong against Cull Obsidian. So he sort of has that weakness for World Boss. But then if you take him into GBR, Galactus, he's not that fast. He's very safe to play, and it's very guaranteed that you're not going to die. You're not going to take much damage unless you completely stand in the way of all of his attacks. But yeah, it does take him several minutes, even with a full PVE build with a CTP of Rage. It does take him several minutes to build up to the point of killing Galactus. So yeah, on the other hand, he's amazing for PvP. Thanos is, by far the best villain and the most consistent villain we've had for PvP. Now, we can give Hulk more time. Maybe by giving Hulk more time, we will see him rise in the PvP rankings. And maybe he will take over as #1. But right now, Thanos is the undisputed champion of the tier 3 villains. Keep in mind, he's double the cost of the Hulk. So is he going to give you double the value of the Hulk with how often he's banned? I'm not sure. However, this week, is Thanos banned? I'm not sure, but I know for sure that Hulk is banned. Actually, Hulk and Thanos are banned. So there you go. None of them are giving you value this week. But yeah, Namor, on the other hand, is basically the exact opposite. He's got super high PvE value and he hits like a truck, but he basically has 0 abilities for PvP. 0 penetration, 0 native healing, 0 iframe ignore, 0 reflect. He's got nothing. They just made him purely for PvE content. He's got a huge HP pool. Huge HP pool, and his new uniform does give him a shield, an HP shield, and it's got a really short cooldown, so a 30% HP shield every 5 seconds could be quite strong, but he would need other things to go along with that. You can see he's sitting at 65,000 HP with a PvE build, so he could go fairly high. Not Immortal Hulk high, but he could go fairly high. He just doesn't have any weapons equipped with him in order to take advantage of that. So it's interesting to see, and it's important to see that these characters have that sort of mirrored value in PvE and PvP. Poor Cyclops is at the bottom for both. Magneto is kind of at the bottom for both. I would say Captain America, looking at these two lists and sort of thinking things through, I think Captain America, Hydra Supreme, and the Hulk, interesting that they're both combat types. Captain America does turn into a blast, but they're both base combat types. I think they would both be the most consistent villain tier 3s at this point, and the cheapest, because you're gonna get more value out of PvE by tier 3 in Captain America and the Hulk than you would from Thanos, and you would get, I think, pretty close, maybe not 100% of the value of tier 3 Thanos, but you would get like 80% of the value. The only difference is the more characters you have for PvE, the better, because of the way that content works with PvE content. But it's sort of the opposite for PvP, because in PvP you can repeat characters, so having one very strong character for PvP is more valuable than having 2 pretty strong characters. Now, if they revamp PvP, if they start changing up the ban lists for timeline battle and things like that, that's a whole different story. But for Alliance Tournament and timeline battle, you can only bring in each character once, and you're only using 3 characters. So with that, I would rather want Thanos on my team than Hulk and Captain America, if that sort of makes sense, because then you're sort of boxing in your team and you're not allowing a lot of other options. Whereas if you just have Thanos, you still have 2 open slots to do anything, whether you want to build more tanky or more offensive, you want to bring in supports, you want to bring in a leadership, etc. So yeah, you also have to take that into consideration, but it is interesting to see them increase the value a lot of 800 cost tier 3s, man. Hulk is so good. And I've had a lot of questions lately about who they should tier 3, Black Widow or Hulk. It's interesting that we're not looking at blast types anymore. We're looking at combat and speed types. And I think that's one thing that Netmarble has done really well, to go off on a little bit of a tangent, is the quality of 800 CCF combat and speed type characters has risen. Winter Soldier wasn't that good, but Black Widow was amazing. Actually, you know what? It's just Black Widow. Well, Luna Snow's amazing as well, but Black Widow is something else. Cap was good from the beginning. Hulk is great. And then Namor is also godly for PvE. But then for Blast, you can see that, Iron Man has sort of waxed and waned, but he was never on top. Cyclops was never on top. Magneto was only good once he got his newest uniform. Professor X is amazing. Star-Lord's pretty amazing. Actually, it's a pretty similar job. There's just more Blast tier 3s. But you do have sort of 2.5 characters, Cyclops, Iron Man, and Magneto, that weren't quite as good as all of the rest, considering everything, and also considering PvE and PvP. That is one thing that For blast types, they either, actually for the most part, they don't have any PvP value besides Jean Grey and Doctor Strange, and a little bit of Scarlet Witch, but none of the 800 CCF tier 3s for the blast type have any PvP value at all. Yeah. And for the speed type, I mean, Ant-Man had his time, Spider-Man had his time, Black Widow had her time in PvP, so only Luna Snow for 800 CCF. And then for combat, you know, Captain America had his time for sure, Namor didn't, but now Hulk is having his time. So that's actually quite interesting for the 800 CCF tier 3s. I think they're undervalued a little bit. I think some people get too wrapped up in going for those 1600 CCF tier 3s, and I think you're going to get a lot more value out of the Hulk, in my opinion, long term, than you will out of Thanos, unless they give Thanos another uniform sometime soon. But I would imagine that they're going to move away from Thanos because of who's coming next. And what I mean by who's coming next, and this is the interesting thing, starting off with villains, we don't have very many villain tier 3s, but we still have a lot of expensive villains that they can tap as tier 3s. So you've got Strife, you've got Doctor Doom. They could go with more mutants. They could touch on anyone from the Black Order, Colossus, Sabretooth, Juggernaut. They've got a lot of options for villains. You've got Dormammu, who could come after Odin. So there's lots and lots of options for them to provide these characters tier 3able. So there's a good possibility that we're going to see a high value, villain tier 3 coming sometime in the future, and that would encourage them to not go back and give Thanos another uniform, because that is less value overall, right? I think they are, I don't know, it's tough to say, but it seems to me like it's in their best interest, in Netmarble's best interest, to, rather than give an existing villain tier 3 an upgrade via uniform, to rather than that, give us a new tier 3 to build up. So like, rather than giving Thor a uniform to make him stronger, why not just release Beta Ray Bill and force players to not only awaken him, but also build up Odin, right? You see what I mean? There's more value in that, and there's more money to be made in that than reworking Thor. There's more money to be made in releasing Silver Surfer than to give Captain Marvel a new uniform or what have you. So that's sort of my attitude towards it. I could be wrong, and I'm not saying that none of the existing tier 3s will ever get a new uniform. They obviously will. But I think overall, they would trend towards doing things like this, rather than looking at existing tier 3s and being like, okay, let's give this character a uniform, let's give that character a uniform to bump them up, because we still have a lot of existing tier 3s who haven't gotten uniforms in a while and may still, not get uniforms for a long time. Like, if there's no Disney Plus show, when is Winter Soldier going to get a new uniform? When is Black Panther going to get a new uniform? Mr. Fantastic, and so on and so forth. So yeah, let me know what you guys think of these two lists. Pretty much the most consistent characters I see from these two lists are Apocalypse and Hulk. I don't really know how to weigh their value because they're both very good in PvE and PvP. I would still give the nod, and I would still choose ultimately the Hulk over Apocalypse, just because I think they're similar in value for PvE and PvP. I think maybe Apocalypse is a little bit better for PvE than the Hulk, but on the flip side, Hulk is half the cost, right? And I know it's X-Men materials versus non, but he's 800 CCF versus 1600. So if you take the cost into consideration, you have to buy the uniform anyways. Like, you have to buy the uniform. So this is 1500 crystals versus 1000. Hulk is much cheaper. And he might not give you 100% of the PvE value, but he's going to give you 90%. And I would say the Hulk and Apocalypse are probably equal in PvP. The Hulk might actually be better. So I'm really high on the Hulk right now. I think he's a very, very good investment for tier 3. And the dual build possibility is just so good. And it's so helpful for newer players and for players who don't have a ton of money or a ton of CTPs, because they can get that CTP from the Captain Marvel Legendary Battle or whatever, and they can have a character that's good enough to do stage 30, 40, 50 of World Boss, but also can carry them any week in PvP and get them enough wins to get some decent crystals when they're not banned. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below what you think of the two lists of the tier 3 rankings for villains. Let me know if you like this format or you'd like a different sort of format. I sort of just threw up the lists and then talked about them. I didn't go into too much depth on characters that I don't really think deserve too much of an explanation. Like, I'm not saying Cyclops, Magneto, and Captain America Hydra are not good characters, but they're just sort of, straightforward characters. You know what to expect and you know what you're going to get from them, whether it's, pure PvE value or mostly PvE value with a splash of PvP. But it's really Thanos, Apocalypse, Hulk, and Namor that are a little bit more mysterious, and I think much more popular as options for tier 3. So that's why I spent the bulk of the video talking about them. But anywho, Let me know what you think. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.